So it was a bit of a busier week, especially with the launch of Peacemaker Season 2, which of course is the first DCU live-action series, and not a retcon. I will continue to reinforce that, and I wonder if any of today's emails will have anything to do with respect to that. They might not, who knows, but we've got a few to get to, of course, for this particular week on Flight Chat, so let's dive headfirst into the fray for this week. Beginning, of course, with John R., who leads us off. He's got a couple of emails this week. This first one, Flight Chat email 1, remembering the 90s. All right, the summary says, he asked for opinions on alternate history scenarios involving Ross Perot and the movie Superman Lives. Oh dear, we're getting a bit political again, aren't we, John? And then it says he also proposed a Jim Carrey cinematic universe and asked about Nintendo's Virtual Boy success and favorite 90s mall memories. Okay, I may be able to oblige him on this one. But let's see, he starts off by saying, songs in the key of wisdom, Skilo. All right. I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was... Oh, okay, I gotcha. I wish I had a girl who looked good. I would call her. I wish I had a rabbit in a hat with a bat and a 6'4". But yes, indeed, of course. He said, the song you told me about, Electric Relaxation, kind of reminded me of this song. Do you have a favorite one-hit wonder song? On the top of my head, I think Closing Time by Semisonic is mine. Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great song as well. I Wish by Skilo. I mean, that's 90s hip-hop. Early 90s hip-hop is where it's at, seriously, because Electric Relaxation, anything Tribe Called Quest, like the whole Midnight Marauders album definitely falls into that category. Also, 93 to Infinity, rather, by Souls of Mischief. That's another good one. Listen to that one. Same vibe. And then, Pete Rock, CL Smooth, they reminisce over you. Like, there's a ton of incredible music, incredible early 90s hip-hop vibe. With respect to one-hit wonders, though, let me think. I'd have to mull on that one for a bit. One-hit wonders. So I broke out the list here on Wikipedia of, list of one-hit wonders in the U.S., and I went straight down to the 90s, and I get to continue the hip-hop theme, the early 90s hip-hop theme, by saying the Humpty Dance by Digital Underground. Yeah, no, I'm gonna keep going on this train. I mean, I live from 90s early hip-hop, seriously, early 90s hip-hop, that is. So that's a good one. Going through this list, I mean, let's see, I like Bismarcky, Just a Friend, but not quite like, wow, there are so many in the 90s. There's so many in 1990. I am not a fan of Ice Ice Baby, but it is on this list. I don't dislike it, but it's not, I would not put it in the same category as, subjectively good hip-hop from the early 90s, no. But yeah, this is a long list. There's a lot here. There's Jump by Criss Cross. There's Jump Around by House of Pain. How about that? Whoop, There It Is by Tag Team. UNITY by Queen Latifah. Yeah, I'm sticking with early 90s hip hop, John. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'm rolling with that answer. So pick a one-hit wonder from that era and from that genre. Yep, there we go. Can't go wrong with any of that, in my opinion, for sure. So right in that same valley. He says, I have 5 questions this week, all 90s themed. All right, we're staying 30 years ago. I hate the fact that the 90s are 30 years ago. Why do the 90s have to be 30 years ago? Seriously. This reminds me, just real briefly, someone pointed out that, Back to the Future, the first Back to the Future film, involved Marty going 30 years into the past, right? Well, that was going from 1985 to 1955. And so if Back to the Future were made today, Marty McFly would be going back to 1995. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I really, really don't like that. 1995, what was I doing? Oh, that's right. My dad was taking me to see Die Hard with a Vengeance. Okay, moving on. Now that I feel even grayer than I did before, here we go. He says, number 1, not trying to stir the pot again with the current political climate. Oh, here we go. But I must know your opinion on this. In an alternate timeline where Ross Perot is elected President of the United States, and a historical upset, where do you think we'd be right now? Would a President Perot derail things badly that it's back to a two-way Dems and GOP race by the next election cycle? I'm guessing it would have ended up like Governor Ventura's time. Congress and Senate would be gridlocked and would not get along with an independent president. Maybe Perot would have a preference between the two. He's had a slight conservative streak about him. Only thing I remember about him is some news coverage and all that female cast member doing that impersonation. I think I remember SNL doing one too. I don't know that this alternate timeline even has a possibility of occurring. I mean, what would have to occur? Because I've said for years, just to dabble in a little bit into the political spectrum here, John. I don't want to like oversaturate things, but I'm not fearful of a question like this. But I've said for years, I said this 9 years ago when people were arguing about whether or not to vote for Hillary in the 2016 election. And they were all, I had friends of mine, I lost friends that year because they were all gung ho about voting third party because they had issues with Hillary. And it's unfortunate that they felt that way because a lot of them contributed to the mess that we're in now. But my biggest issue with voting third party is that there's no congressional support. None whatsoever. And I don't know how many independent Congress members there were in 1992. I doubt there were any, truthfully, not that I can think of. But 535 members of the House of Representatives and the Senate. And I think at the time of Hillary versus Trump in 2016, there were only two that weren't Democrat or Republican. You're never going to win a presidential race that way, ever. It's not going to happen. It's not feasibly possible. So I submit to you, John, that this alternate universe is only possible if Congress doesn't exist. If there isn't there isn't even a grassroots movement strong enough to put Ross Perot into that position. So this may seem like a cop out, but your alternate reality has no feasibility whatsoever. There's no way that it can happen. I know you might say, well, that's why it's an alternate reality. Yeah, but alternate reality, usually, it's a divergence of paths, right? Oh, it could have gone this way or it could have gone that way. There's no feasible way that I could see that Ross Perot would have ever been elected president, not with no congressional support in that regard. So yeah, I don't see this one being feasible. I can't rightfully answer this one, to be honest with you. Oh, but you had a further scenario. Because in your email you sent a GIF of the all that impersonation. You said positives: U.S. would have backed out of NAFTA. Our debt might have gradually decreased. Perot wouldn't have needed to create the Reform Party, therefore potentially kneecapping Trump's future presidential ambitions. Negatives: not enough independent representatives in either the House or the Senate, which is what I just said. Would bills Perot wanted to pass have been put into law, or would there just be this perpetual gridlock? Lack of experience. Now, there are outliers to this. Celebrities as statesmen got elected into office, and some did a pretty good, but then some did have done a bad job. Maybe some of them are orange. Okay. Yeah, this isn't realistic, John. Usually with alternate realities, scenarios, there's a realistic path to it happening. There isn't one. Not with zero congressional support whatsoever. Would Perot's policies make crime safer? Would major tragedies like Oklahoma bombings have occurred? No, you say, I guess we'll never know. We will never know, to be honest with you. It's a loaded what if that is fraught with peril and really I don't think can legitimately be answered at all, and honest with you. And even this last sentence where you say the only elected independent president we had was Washington, he did a pretty good job, all things considered. Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially brown people, would disagree with you on that, to be honest with you. So, it's intriguing, but, I don't think we can go much further with it. So let's just move on to the second question. And this is intriguing because you preface this with a GIF of Nicolas Cage's Superman from The Flash. All right. So he says another alternate reality. Where would the genre be if Superman Lives got made? Okay, now this one is realistic because this could have happened and there is a potential scenario for this. Let's see what he says. He says the plan was for it to come out in 1998, right? Okay, same year Blade comes out. Since Warner Brothers acquired New Line, I'm guessing they push Blade to 1999. Trajectory: if the film is a hit, makes 600 million worldwide. Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man, I think, still come out, he says. I think Spider-Man moves to 2003, so a Superman sequel gets made in 2002. Nolan, I think, still does Batman Begins in 2005, but then they hire a director for Batman vs. Superman in 2006 or 2007. Hard to say where the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Fox X-Men wins up. But what if it's received poorly, he says. I don't know if they still end up doing Superman Returns or wait another 10 years for Superman, or maybe J.J. Abrams' Flyby script gets made. I think comic book movies still do okay, but perhaps the poor reception of Batman and Robin and Superman Lives stings the genre a bit, but this would just mean they can't screw these two characters up the next time. Or the third option, he says, what if it's just okay? A superhero film being okay doesn't really seem to exist. Most people say they're either good or bad or there's no in between. Is there even a comic book film where everyone universally agrees, it was okay? Captain Underpants, maybe? Okay usually means it's divisive, he says. I imagine it'll be the same trajectory as Batman Forever, and they'll try fast tracking a sequel to 2001, and the future of Superman would be up in the air depending on the sequel. I think Warner Brothers has always had Batman v Superman as a concept in the back burner since the 90s or early 2000s. I feel that was a trump card they had always contemplated. So, what do you think happens? So, here's the thing. First off, with these what if scenarios, John, I think we can't apply anything that we've learned in the last 20 some odd years over what has actually happened to any logic that would have occurred back in that time because it's leading the witness. It's unfair, right? And not only that, like we have too much, emotional stake in the timeline that we're in now to separate ourselves and really say, oh, well, this would have happened and that would happen. Here's the most that I could say would have happened. If Superman Lives had released, then we would have had a different incarnation of Superman, and these giant gaps in between his solo movies would not have existed. That's what I would say, because I think that Warner Brothers, they got into this habit of just relying on Batman, 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 Batman. These producers love Batman, and that's why we have so many Batman movies. That's why we have so many Batman adaptations. And I think what would have occurred is, if Superman Lives releases in 1998, well, now you're only talking about an 11-year gap between that and Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, right? 11 years instead of 19, that's a big deal. So whether or not Superman Returns still gets made, I think the Batman v Superman idea would have happened in some form. Now, whether it becomes Batman Begins and Superman Returns and then a team up, I don't know. But I do think that at the very least, the gaps in between Superman solo movies would not exist. I don't know what else would have happened. Like, I can't tell you that J.J. Abrams' Superman flyby would have occurred. I can't tell you that, Batman Begins would have gone the same way that it did. I think that a Batman v Superman or a Batman Superman team up of some sort would have happened a lot sooner than 2016. I do think that much. I think it would have accelerated things, and Superman wouldn't have. I think there would be that as far as the discussion with his incarnations, there wouldn't be as much of a gap. We'd hear some new themes. Somebody would have created a theme other than John Williams, right? So the conversation would have been closer to the Batman conversation where people would have picked a favorite as opposed to really leaning hard into the Christopher Reeve, Richard Donner version being the only one because it's the most prominent one that he's had up to this point, right? So you may even get to a point where, if we had a Superman movie that came out around now, and who knows if it's James Gunn's Superman or not, but it wouldn't be a case where so many people are like, well, you've got to use the Williams theme, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do that. And whoever makes that film wouldn't be feeling that way because there would be other incarnations of Superman. And the conversation would be not necessarily, I'm not trying to say more lenient. I'm saying that it wouldn't be so beholden to one incarnation and one epic version because there would be other versions, like there is with Batman. That's why the Batman conversation really revolves around his no-kill rule and people that want to be, sticklers and nitpicky about that. But people have their own favorite interpretation. There are people who love Keaton. There are people who love Bale. There are people who love Affleck. I'm one of them. Affleck is my favorite. There are people who love Pattinson. And there will be people who love, the further incarnations live action. There are people who love Conroy, animated, obviously. There are people who love Adam West, right? The point is that there's a favorite Batman that people can point to, whereas now we're only just now starting to see a conversation expand for Superman, right? We're seeing people, at least I'm seeing people, call David Corenswet their favorite. And there's a generation now, whether it is late Gen Z or early Gen Alpha, in the midst of Gen Alpha, that can call David Corenswet their favorite Superman and not be so beholden to Christopher Reeve or Henry Cavill. So now we can start to have that conversation because we have three versions of Superman cinematically that we can talk about. We haven't had that until now, right? So now we had three definitive versions, right? People want to say Brandon Routh, he only had one movie. And, well, Henry Cavill only had one movie. He only had one solo movie. For this discussion in terms of his incarnations and his presence, we can bring in BVS. We can bring in Zack Snyder's Justice League for this particular discussion. But at any rate, that's the only thing that I think would change is our discussion surrounding different versions of Superman would change if Superman Lives actually existed, whether it was received poorly or not, truthfully. And, I think back then reception would have been different than it is now because reception changed really quite a bit. The early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, right? Between X-Men in 2000 and Batman Begins in 2005, that's really where the conversation really started to change. Because 3 years after that was the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Yeah, that's where the transition period occurred, as far as like, because we were still in a position, we were still in a part, like for all of us, in the late '90s, where we weren't certain how viable Hollywood treated the superhero genre, and then it became very clear after that transition period with Spider-Man and how much money it made, and how much money the TDK trilogy was about to make, that superheroes were viable in that, and that's when it started to get bigger, with respect to the MCU and the massive expansion, and then even on television with the Arrowverse, the DCCW on the CW, like so, all of that like changed then, but we were in that holding pattern now, and I feel like having a different version of Superman would have altered that conversation, right? There still would have been gatekeepers, there still would have been pearl clutchers, but it would have been a different conversation in terms of who's your favorite Superman, and it would have been closer, and I would have preferred that, truthfully, but I think we're going to get there now. It's just 20 some odd years later in that regard. So that's as much as I could say for certain. All that other stuff, no idea, man. And it's an unfair discussion to have in that regard because we just don't know. Like we can't apply what actually happened to what might have happened because it's too much. It's like cheating in that regard as far as knowing the future of what actually occurred. So either way. So he said we're staying in the 90s with his email, and he wasn't kidding with this third question. He says, okay, I had to think of a connective tissue, the Jim Carrey cinematic universe. Four films come to mind, he says, and it all starts with The Truman Show. After Truman Fairbanks leaves the studio, he pulls a Frank Abagnale and lives the life of a con artist. Yeah, but that's not Jim Carrey. That's Leonardo DiCaprio. So you're going to Spielberg and Catch Me If You Can, and Tom Hanks as well in that one. But he says, living different lives. One could be Chip from Cable Guy. It explains his obsession with TV. He was literally born and raised to be a star. He could play dumb and start a life as Lloyd Christmas. I don't think he can be the dad from Liar Liar, otherwise he'd tell the truth of his past. Perhaps there's a chance he becomes Dr. Eggman / Robotnik. He's technically an orphan as he was raised by actors. I haven't seen I Love You, Philip Morris, but I think he plays a similar character to Chip. Any other films Carrey could change lives in? I don't know, truthfully, because there's a lot of his movies I have not watched. The last movie his that I watched that I really enjoyed was probably Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and that's now a 21-year-old movie. I hate this. I hate how old shit is becoming now. But that's the best movie, in my opinion, that he's ever done. I haven't even fully seen The Truman Show, to be honest with you. I've seen Cable Guy. But as far as, like, I have not even seen, to this day, I still have not seen the Sonic the Hedgehog movies. I don't even know how he is as as Dr. Eggman in Sonic the Hedgehog in that regard. So I really can't answer this particular question. But then someone could bring up what was that one TV series that he was in? It was a Showtime series where it seemed like he was playing like a almost like a Mr. Rogers type character or something. Yeah, it was called Kidding. It came out in 2018 and ran for 2 seasons. And he plays a character, Jeff Pickles, aka Mr. Pickles, a pillar of kindness and wisdom to the impressionable minds of America's youth and to the parents who grew up with him. So, yeah, pretty much Mr. Rogers. But it says when Mr. Pickles' family begins to implode, his life starts to take a downward spiral. He must put the fables and puppets aside to get through this newest crisis in life. As the slow leak of sanity advances faster than he can cope with, the cruel world breaks his heart. That sounds very depressing. But yeah, so that's another one, to ask with respect to it. But again, I haven't seen any of this, like any of these, or any of the films and whatnot. So I can't really, in good conscience, good faith, answer that particular question. So that one's a bit of a dud for me. So question 4. Where do you think Nintendo would be right now if the Virtual Boy was a success? We definitely would have gotten a Pokemon title. The company had intended to use a link cable. That's a great question that I, again, can't really answer. Like, I don't really do well with what if questions like this, to be honest with you, especially ones that go that far back. And the Virtual Boy, I never had one. I tried one. Like, they had one that was like a demo at what store was that? Would Target or yeah, I feel like they had the demo units most of the time, like without going into a GameStop. But I wasn't even a GameStop customer back in the '90s, like at all. Truthfully, like back then it wasn't. It was started out as FuncoLand and EB Games and stuff like that. So I don't think that Nintendo would be in a lesser place than they are now if the Virtual Boy had been a success. And the other difficult part of answering this question is that Nintendo's been a success. Nintendo is the only video game company that I know of that, like, they can literally drive, like, the customer base mad with the release of a console. I mean, like, I have seen crazy shit with respect to people like going nuts over Nintendo consoles. When I was a kid in the mid to late 90s, when the 64 came out, that thing was impossible to find, and everybody wanted one. And my parents have told me the story of how they got one. I still don't remember because it was just, I only remember the mind blowing, the way that Christmases happened when we had Christmas parties is that the rule was, since my birthday is Christmas, the rule is that, or was, that I could open Christmas presents like as soon as, we got presents under the tree, like as soon as I woke up for Christmas Day, but I had to wait until after we sang happy birthday to open birthday presents. So what would customarily happen for a while is my parents, and my family, like, I love my family dearly. They always believed in giving me separate gifts. Knowing that my birthday was on Christmas, they never wanted me to get screwed over like so many other kids did whose birthdays aren't even on Christmas but were too close to the holiday, like any December birthdays. Like I've heard this story from a lot of people before. But what would happen is that my spoiled ass, because I was spoiled. No, I make no bones about that. I was very spoiled. I had an awesome childhood, in that regard. But with respect to gifts that I was given, the birthday present, the big birthday present, like I get the big Christmas present from my parents earlier in the day, and I get the big birthday present after we sang happy birthday. And so that's, I sang happy birthday. This is what, Christmas of 96. We had just moved into like our new house, or at the time it was a new house. We still call it the new house. It's been like over almost 30 years. But it was the first big Christmas there, and my dad goes into the garage. He comes out and he brings out this cold ass box. It's a Nintendo 64. They found, my mom and dad found a Nintendo 64 when nobody could find Nintendo 64s, and it was insane. I will never forget that memory. It was awesome. I love that system. Love that. But the hilarious part about it was I was a teenager at that time. I was 13 going into 14. I turned 14 that year. And I remember the next year was when I got into like sports games, and I got a PlayStation for Christmas, and I basically let my sister Rachel have the Nintendo 64, which she played like Mario Kart and other stuff on. But I still played Super Mario 64. That game is still like one of the greatest games ever made, as far as I'm concerned. But I say all of this to say that Nintendo has experienced unbridled success since then. The Nintendo 64, everybody went nuts over. People to this day still love the GameCube, as I do. I still love the GameCube as well. The GameCube is such an underrated console, damn it, which is weird because Nintendo usually doesn't make underrated consoles. But with respect to the games that were available for that system, Mario games included, phenomenal. The Wii craze, yes, the Wii craze, real, demonstrative. People chasing the UPS trucks into our store, families giving the mom, dad, and the son $250 cash a piece so they could resell them on eBay for a quadruple markup. Like, it was just insane. And there was hype, but even behind the Wii U, however long that lasted, there was hype behind the Switch, continued hype behind the Switch. Even with like tariffs and inflation and shit going on this year, there was still hype behind the Switch 2 being released this year. So Nintendo is not lacking for success whatsoever. So Virtual Boy, if it had actually succeeded, would simply just have added to the success that Nintendo has already cultivated. They are a monster, seriously. Like, for all that we talk about with Microsoft, for all that we talk about with Sony and the PlayStation systems and whatnot, Nintendo has been steady, as far as I'm concerned. Steady like a rock for 40 plus years in that regard, as far as I'm concerned. And of course, the first system I ever had was an 8-bit Nintendo. So, yeah, that's what I would say. The Virtual Boy would have just added to the success that they've already had over the last 30, 40 years. But all right, on to number 5. What do you miss most about the 90s, he asks. I think it was a better time, a more innocent time. I'd probably warn my younger self to try his best not to accidentally kill his pet fish or pet birds. But the one thing I miss about the 90s, he says, the malls. Oh my God, the malls back in the 90s were so much better than the ones today, if there are any left. Do you remember life at the mall? Man, Stride Right Shoes was the place to go. They had Nicktoon mascot meet and greets. I met Doug and Pork Chop at a Burger King and a mall. I also met Angelica, Tommy, and Chucky at my town's other mall. I gotta find the pics. I don't have Doug, but I know the Rugrats are in my photo album somewhere. He said the food court was also a lot better. They had fresh choice salad buffet. There was more than just GameStop for video game stores. Suncoast. I just discovered there's one Suncoast left and it's in Ohio. That was my place of peace, looking at Japanese imported stuff for hours, and you didn't feel judged if you didn't end up buying anything. I probably spent at least $200 buying Dragon Ball Z VHS and DVDs. Do you have any favorite mall memories or even just 90s memories in general? Yeah, I do. I could spend an entire show talking about this. The fifth and final question of your feedback, your 90s feedback email is the best question by far. It's loaded. First of all, let's see. So with respect to what do I miss most about the 90s? I will say that, like you say it's a better time, or you think it was a better time, a more innocent time. I don't know about better. Um, Nostalgic, absolutely. And as far as that innocence, that's always a 50-50 for me. Because I feel like a lot of the innocence that we had in the 90s is because there was a lot of shit going on that we didn't know. And, that's the downside to knowing so much now, is that it's good to be in the know, but it's also not good in terms of creating a court of public opinion and the idea of people thinking that cancel culture is a real thing. It's not, it's consequence culture. But, like, that type of perception and knee jerk reaction, that's the downside to knowing everything. There are things that we didn't know in the 90s that we do know now, and we should know them. But unfortunately, it's just the cult of personality and the court of public opinion have really shaped things and made things a lot more dour, and maybe they should have been that dour. But like, for example, the freedom that we had as kids. Well, not that our parents didn't watch us and didn't go trick or treating with us on Halloween, but it was still a neighborhood activity, right? There was no trunk or treats. There was no, okay, let's have everybody show up in the gym at the school and we'll do an indoor trick or treating. No, it wasn't any of that. And I feel like a lot of times, and sometimes, maybe not a lot of times, but sometimes with communities nowadays, they do that because they want to make life and work easier on themselves as parents, because they're working and they don't necessarily want to go the extra mile like a lot of our parents necessarily did back in the day with trick or treating. And I realize it's more difficult for parents to do that now significantly because of the economic situation, but that is one thing that I miss, is that type of freedom, and even like, going outside and those types of freedoms. Now granted, again, there was probably some shit going on back then, some creepy shit that we weren't aware of. That certainly still goes on now, but now it's the potential for, it being exposed is more readily available, which that's a good thing. But that's where I stop at saying, oh, it was a more innocent time. I don't know if it was a more innocent or if we just were unaware of stuff that was going on. But either way, yeah, I mean, being a kid in the 90s was awesome. We had awesome toys, we had awesome commercials. Nickelodeon was like my favorite channel. It was the only channel I needed. Literally the only channel I needed as a kid. And I mean, those every Monday through Friday, going to, my grandmother, she would babysit for us, and the way the day would go a lot of times is, but before Nickelodeon, or even when we got cable, right? Like Nickelodeon was what it was, but there was also like TNT. I remember they used to show the Muppet Show and Looney Tunes, and like that used to be a big thing, like in the evenings from like 6 to 8 o'clock. I'd even get into the Nick at Night shows because back then it was my parents and my grandma talking about all the old sitcoms that they used to watch and grow up on, like, Patty Duke, Donna Reed, Dobie Gillis, stuff like that. Like, that was cool. That was really cool. So, like, television was different. But, yeah, dude, as I got older, like, whenever I would get a chance to, like, commandeer a TV, like, whether it was in the basement, because there was this big brown fuzzy couch in my grandmother's basement, and it was always cool in the summers, and that was just my domain, man. I would just sit there and I would hang out, and all I would watch is Nickelodeon. It was all I would need, all I needed, man. And like Inspector Gadget and hey, did I watch Hey Dude? I did on occasion, right? And sometimes I would watch Welcome Freshman. This is like but Wild and Crazy Kids. That was one of like my favorite game shows. Like, it was game show type shows with respect to like after school, and then you had Get the Picture, Nick Arcade, like, and then of course Snick. Man, oh man, Snick. That was so good. The first like however many years of that, right? You had, what did you have? You had Secret World of Alex Mack at 8 o'clock. You had Roundhouse, which was later replaced by All That at 8:30. You had Ren and Stimpy at 9, which we didn't realize was a cartoon that we shouldn't have been watching, but it was totally one that we watched. And then Are You Afraid of the Dark at 9:30 before you get into the Nick at Night days. And I still continued on to Nick at Night, but Snick was phenomenal. Snick was so good. Yeah, loved that. So that's stuff that I definitely miss about the 90s. But also, you bring up malls, man, and you're not kidding. Malls absolutely were much better back then. And we know what it is today. What it is that online shopping and convenience, Amazon and online retailers, that's really what has changed the game, and that's really what has pushed big box stores out of contention. It's really affected malls because there's no reason for these storefronts to exist when you can online shop in that regard. And it's sad because malls to me, like as a kid, that was one of my favorite places to go to, was the mall. And my mother would drive me mad because her signature mall store is J.C. Penney. And for years, what would happen is we would go to J.C. Penney. And I mean, like, we'd get into the store, right? Because that was our mall entrance. We didn't go into the mall through like any mall entrances. Our signature store was J.C. Penney. But there would be times where we would only go to J.C. Penney, and it would drive me nuts because the mall was right there. There's the door. Just let's walk a couple of feet further. Just go into this indoor metropolis of commerce. And man, the elevators and just the setup and all the different stores, the toy stores. They had KB Toys in there as well when that was still going. And as I got older, I got into like Walden Books, because I like going to the bookstore and stuff like that, and just all the different places to go. I just loved the environment. I loved the indoor metropolistic environment of a mall. There's a mall that was our neighborhood mall when we lived in Detroit. It's called Fairlane. It's still there. It's technically in Dearborn. It's off of Ford Road. You take the Southfield Freeway. For anybody who lives in the state of Michigan, you take the Southfield Freeway south, get off Ford Road exit, right? And that mall is, I mean, it's nothing now. I mean, it's such a ghost town. I went in there like a year or so ago, and it's just so deserted and depressing, and it's like a couple of storefronts away from being completely shut down. They're remodeling everything. It's not gonna be there in the next 5 years or so. They're gonna tear it down and do something. They're not gonna revitalize it. But when I was a kid, that mall was the shit. That mall was like big time, and like I remember it would like and where the signature stores were at, it would be 2 levels, but when you got into the center, it would turn into 3 levels. And when you get there, they had these elevators in the center of the mall, and the second level was my favorite. Why? Because that was where the restaurants were. You talk about a food court. This place had a food court, but it also had restaurants, and there was a mall McDonald's across the hall from an Olga's, right? And I don't know what it was just about how it was set up in this mall. If you go look at old pictures of Fairlane Town Center in Dearborn, Michigan, you can check this out. I'm sure there's pictures of it somewhere on the internet. But it was just really cool and really quaint, and just like I loved it. It was like the greatest thing for a kid, for me as a kid, to go to the mall. And that was like our neighborhood mall in Detroit, but we would go to other malls. There's 12 Oaks out on Novi, which is a mall that is definitely still in existence. And I would not call it thriving, but it's not shutting down anytime soon. They definitely have, some mostly storefronts there, but they got a lot of empty storefronts, like a lot of malls do. I mean, there's Somerset Collection in Troy, which is the bougiest mall probably in the state of Michigan. That's in Troy. They got closed storefronts, right? But they're still in business doing what they do. But the first mall ever, Northland Mall, like literally, like it's off the Lodge in Southfield or just around the Southfield area. Like that mall shut down many years ago, but that one, I remember that mall. They used to have Hudson's, right? Hudson's is a Midwest thing. It's a Michigan thing. And Hudson's later evolved into Marshall Field's, which is now Macy's, right? If you go into a Macy's, odds are many years ago, that used to be a Hudson's if you were in the Midwest, if you were in Michigan, right? But at any rate, they used to do this thing. It was like this walkthrough diorama of like different Disney stories where it's Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Pinocchio, right? And we'd take field trips and we'd go to these walking dioramas that were inside the damn mall because they had like a whole setup. They'd do it for Christmas and for different holidays, and they had the movie theaters out there. That the first movie theater that I ever went to was the Millennium Theater, which was right Katy Corner from Northland Mall. I saw the first movie, my first ever theatrical movie, and I'm dating myself, An American Tail. That's right, Fievel. There are no cats in America, and the streets are filled with cheese. Yes, that movie. I saw that when I was like 4, 3 or 4 years old. My parents took me to see that. Came out in like what, 85, 86? Yeah, somewhere around there. But yeah, man, there's a lot. There's a whole lot that I miss about the 90s, and I can get into it, man. We can have a discussion about favorite Nicktoons. My favorite Nicktoon by far. I know people love Rugrats. Rugrats was awesome. I know people love Doug. Doug was awesome. I know people love Rocko's Modern Life. I never really got into it that much, but I watched it a little bit here and there. I know people love Hey Arnold, and then you get into Cat Dog and Fairly Odd Parents and the stuff that was beyond my time. And of course, SpongeBob SquarePants, which I never got into. But for me, pound for pound, best Nicktoon for me, subjectively speaking, Real Monsters. There is no Nicktoon better than that for me. That, and why the hell isn't that on Blu-ray yet? It's on DVD, I think, but why isn't it on Blu-ray yet? They need to put that on Blu-ray. Get on it, Nickelodeon. Get on it, Paramount. Come on now. Yes. Real Monsters, Ickis, Oblina, and Crumb, and the Grumble. Yes, love that. Oh, such a brilliant, brilliant Nicktoon. The best Nicktoon by far, in my humble opinion, subjectively speaking. So yeah, lots of 90s memories, and I'm only scratching the surface. We could talk about this for much longer than just this email, John. We most certainly could. This unlocks a lot of core memories for me, talking about the 90s, and with respect to music, with respect to TV, with respect to movies, a whole lot. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that particular question. And it looks like we're going to continue with the yesteryear chat because your second email, that's right, that was only your first email. Your second email titled Flight Chat number 2, Yesterday and Today. So let's see. He starts off by saying, first off, remembering Terrence Stamp. Yes, indeed. Rest in peace, Terrence Stamp. He says he lived a relatively long life. 87 is pretty good, all things considered. Aside from Zod, I always liked that he played the mentor in the film Wanted. He'll be missed. I have not seen Wanted yet. I should, though, because I technically now own it. I found it on sale at Walmart about a month or so ago. A really nice looking steelbook. So it's in my possession. I should sit down and watch it and probably record a flight review episode for Patreon for that. But here are the questions from this email. He's got 5 more questions. Here we go. Looks like they're all still nostalgic. He says, 1, I remember you wore glasses for a bit. Did you start wearing contacts or get LASIK or just realize your eyes weren't all that bad? Or were they screen protector glasses? They were blue light glasses. And I didn't wear them like a ton. I wore them on occasion. This was a couple of years ago. I was researching blue light glasses because of eye strain and like sitting in front of monitors, which I do on a regular basis, not just now, but also at work. And I was into them for a little bit, but further research proved that there really isn't any demonstrable effect for blue light glasses. It doesn't necessarily de-stress your eyes, in a tangible sense. So I said, I don't need to put up with it because they were always hurt. Like the bridges, like I don't know, just how they fit. Like they weren't like a properly measured size, so they would hurt after a while. Like my ears, they would hurt. So it wasn't a vision thing. My vision, I hope I don't need glasses in the distant future. I hope that my eyesight continues to be strong. Who knows, as we get older, things start, aging in that regard. But so far, no, I do not need a prescription glasses just as of yet. So we'll see how it goes. But knock on wood for that. But either way. All right, number 2. He says, this is probably a dumb question, but is Supergirl going to wear that trench coat for her entire movie? I'm guessing probably not the whole movie, but she'll probably continue to wear it. Also, wouldn't Krypto need to hide his identity? Maybe not. Why would Krypto need to hide his identity? I mean, so he's associated with Superman, and he's also associated with Supergirl. I mean, I think people would understand that there is some connection between Superman and Supergirl, not just because they're both Kryptonian, but also obviously the crest, the House of El crest, and the uniforms. I don't see why Krypto would need to hide his identity at all. He's not protecting anything in that regard. As far as whether or not she wears a trench coat for the whole movie, is that question not answered in the Woman of Tomorrow comic that I still need to read? Because if she wears it all the time in that comic, then she may wear it all the time in the movie, I would think. I don't know. It depends on how they adapt the screenplay, but I feel like that might help answer that particular question. I will say, though, that with respect to all this controversy over the people thinking that Peacemaker Season 2, Episode 1 retconned the DCEU, which it did not whatsoever, but since Supergirl is seen in that shot that everybody is talking about, Perhaps that would indicate that no, she does not always wear the trench coat, because she clearly wasn't in that particular shot, even though we can only really see the silhouette of her. So perhaps that could also help answer that particular question, John. All right, this third question is a bit personal. He says, do you have a destination in mind for a honeymoon? Hawaii seems to be the sweet spot for a lot of people. When I was engaged, I was shooting for Hawaii or Mexico. Somewhere warm, so I guess those two are on the list, but somewhere warm, I guess, is really the best that I can tell you with respect to that. Okay, this fourth question, though, this is intriguing. How would you feel if a bill was passed for a 32-hour work week that still allows you to still get paid for your time doing 40 hours? That means you 4 8-hour days or 3 11-hour days. If you had the option to pick what day of the week you'd want off, which one would it be? I would probably pick either Wednesday or Friday. 4 days of work in a row, then 3 days off. On the flip side, Wednesdays off would be better for me. If the job requires me doing 11 hours 3 days a week, then I choose Wednesdays and Fridays off. I like the 3-day weekend. The idea of like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Yes, I thoroughly enjoy that. And I feel like the structure of the 4-day work week would be best for that. I am a massive proponent of the 4-day work week. It's the 32-hour work week, yes, certainly. Or even, you know what, depending on the job, obviously. But even in my job where I work, like, even if it was 4 10s, but that still meant that like Friday, Saturday, Sunday I had off, I'd do that. I would. Most certainly I would. So for me, that would be a case of, instead of working 4 a.m. to noon, I'd be working 4 a.m. to 2. But then again, I would have those, to have the 3-day weekend, I mean, there's so much that you could do, right? I mean, listen, 4 8s, and it's at the same rate, or like you adjust my rate so that it's the same annual in that regard. Yeah, that would be awesome. That'd be amazing. Truthfully, I'm definitely a proponent of the 4-day work week. I don't know that will ever happen. Certainly not now. Not in the current climate, politically speaking. Not in the current climate with respect to who is in Washington, and even certain state governments. I know there might be some that are more amenable to it, but yeah, I think we're a ways away from our leaders caring that much about the American people, because they just don't at this point in time. But yeah, not to get political again, but you know how that goes. All right, number 5. He says, what cartoon nobody ever talks about anymore? Mr. Bogus. Not when I met Andre Black Nerd knew the show, and he's obscure 80s and 90s cartoon encyclopedia. Is Living Single also obscure like that, or would you say it has a pretty decent following? Living Single is not obscure. No, Living Single is not obscure. Certainly not amongst black audiences. It's not obscure, but no, it definitely, Living Single has more of a following than that. Because I vaguely remember Mr. Bogus, but no, Living Single definitely is bigger than that. He says, I can't even find a Mr. Bogus GIF. I'll have to send a picture like a caveman, LOL. Yeah, that's another reason why Living Single I know is bigger, because Living Single GIFs are all over the place. And like, they're doing the Reliving Single podcast now, and finding merch. And like I said, even though they haven't released it on Blu-ray, I can still find it on DVD, and it's sold digitally. So yeah, those can be found for sure. But he says, for those who don't know, this show actually followed a format similar to Power Rangers, whereas they use original American footage as the plot and splice it with foreign footage of Bogus and claymation. Since he was a show of short sketches in France, consider this a bonus 90s question. I vaguely remember seeing this, but never watched it. That's the best that I can do for you with that one. I do remember it, but not to the point where I could recall details or even know where it was shown around here in Michigan, to be honest with you. So either way, yeah, that is a bonus 90s question for sure. Definitely more obscure for sure. And I think that'll do it for John's emails this week. Thank you as always for the feedback, John. Thank you for the trip down into the 90s, down the memory lane, if you will. Like we could do, like I could do a 90s show. I could totally do like one of those 90s shows like they do like all the time, like different accounts and whatnot that you follow on social media, different podcasts. I could totally do that very easily. But yeah, thank you for that look back into that particular decade from my childhood, sir. Indeed, greatly appreciated as always. All right, next up is Stu Little with an email titled Welcome to Earth. This looks like it's primarily TV catch-up. He says, hello, you said you'd welcome me talking about the new King of the Hill season if I wanted to, and since I've watched the whole thing now, I'll cover it a bit. I probably said that, Stu. I've never watched the show, but hey, either way, let's hear your thoughts for anybody that has seen it. He says they really knocked it out of the park and basically took what the show was about it originally and just updated it with everyone a bit older. The basic gist of the original was an old-school Texan propane salesman learning to change his ways a bit with the times, while also sometimes applying his old-fashioned integrity and common sense to more ridiculous things. The new show is basically that, with Hank and his wife Peggy returning home after spending 7 years working in Saudi Arabia. Their small town of Arlen has changed, and it takes some getting used to, but Hank is constantly seeing what's important and getting to be a part of it, while his son Bobby is now an adult and working hard to get his Japanese-German fusion restaurant off the ground. As an example of one episode, Hank finds himself having to be a male role model to his teenage half-brother, Good Hank. Long story, Hank and his World War II vet dad's relationship wasn't exactly simple. All right. Initially supporting him joining a manosphere-type support group because on the surface, it seemed like it was promoting basic values of faith, family, and financial security, but once he discovers it's a bunch of woman-hating nonsense, he calls it out for the BS it is. It's very much in the spirit of the original series where often Hank's assumptions or beliefs gets him in a little deep with something he didn't expect, and he either changes from it or applies his actual good tendencies into being a positive change. The returning other characters are done well too, he says. Some kept pretty much the same, and some updated in interesting ways, though not without some sadness, as multiple voice actors have been lost before, during, and even after the new season was recorded, with Johnny Hardwick having passed from illness while voicing Hank's conspiracy nut friend Dale, and having to have some of his work replaced by Toby Huss. Recurring character John Redcorn's voice actor Jonathan Joss was also this year tragically shot and killed by a neighbor he'd had a long-standing feud with. I think I heard about that. I saw people's reactions on social media to that. It was very, very tragic. He said it's unknown if the role will be recast or not. The original series also had the late Brittany Murphy as Hank and Peggy's lovable but naive niece Luann. One time she accidentally joined a cult, thinking it was a sorority, and she wasn't a returning character, but the original series also had her married and living elsewhere by the end, so it's not like the character's existence felt incomplete. So on balance, he says, I thought the revival has been pretty good, with not much to complain about. The animation feels a little cheaper and less intensive than the original, but I think that's acceptable for what we're getting and how long that can take. All right, so those are some positive thoughts largely from Stu on the King of the Hill revival, if you will. Revival. It drives me mad when like news outlets like call it a reboot. Like they call the 2 seasons of Frasier that just happened on Paramount Plus, they called it a Frasier reboot. It's not a reboot, it's a revival because it's connected to the original 11 seasons, and it seems like this is the same here, where this is connected to the original King of the Hill and is exclusively streaming on Hulu, just like another revival that I really need to get caught up on, which is Futurama, because I love the original Futurama, not just the original 5 seasons on Fox, but also the subsequent seasons on Comedy Central. Thoroughly enjoy that show, and I need to watch the episodes of the Hulu revival because there are new ones coming like in the next few weeks or so. So yeah, got to get that going. And they got all the cast back for that. They got everybody back for that one. And we were worried about John DiMaggio, whether or not he'd come back as Bender, but he has. And yeah, I need to get into that one. Need to get back into that one. It's been a minute since I've watched Futurama. Futurama is one of those sitcoms that I've watched and rewatched multiple times and have developed a slightly controversial perspective that I think it's better than The Simpsons as a sitcom as a whole. I know it's Matt Groening and it's all his world and all that, and they've done crossovers for sure, but still, that's just how I feel with it. But yeah, cool. King of the Hill revival gets a thumbs up, largely from Stu. All right. So he says, next and finally, I want to review Alien Earth. All right, briefly, for anybody that doesn't know, Alien Earth is a television series that just released on FX that takes place in the Alien universe. And if I remember correctly, I just talked with somebody about this. I think I talked with them about this on Vodka Stream a week or so ago. Apparently, in the timeline, the show takes place just before the very first Alien film, the original in 1979, directed by Ridley Scott. So, all right. And I think Stu's going to mention that here shortly. He says, I will admit, I was a little nervous about this series, given it's another prequel in a franchise that hasn't always had popular new entries, though I thought Romulus was great. Yeah, I've heard great things about Romulus. I'm behind, though. And the promotional campaign, he says, was very intentionally mysterious and vague about what the plot was beyond the very basic setup. 3 episodes in, though, I really dig this show, he says. It walks the line of being respectful and faithful to the core of Alien while having a bit of a feel of its own as it expands the lore a bit, with Noah Hawley bringing his knack for both unnerving tone and offbeat humor, as seen in his work on the Fargo and Legion shows, of which I have seen neither, so I really am in the dark with respect to Noah Hawley's sensibilities, so you guys are ahead of me on that. Surprise. He says the basic setup. is that a couple of years before the events of the first Alien movie, a Weyland-Yutani ship, hauling not just a xenomorph specimen but several other new creatures, suffers from an outbreak and crashes on Earth, specifically right into a populated city. The ship's surviving officer, the ship's surviving science officer, Morrow, who is also a cyborg, tasks himself with capturing the escaped Xeno and keeping the company's secrets, while a group from a rival corporation called Prodigy shows up to investigate and an independent rescue team additionally intervenes. Prodigy's team is made up of a group of characters who have names of the children from Peter Pan for reasons I won't spoil, and is overseen by an android played by Timothy Olyphant, who gets to be pretty unnerving, lacking the friendliness his characters tend to have, while occasionally waxing philosophical about humanity's place in the food chain. Primary member of the team is Wendy, a girl who argued to come along for this because she knew her long-lost brother Joe, played by Andor's Nemec, and the main character of the Black Mirror episode Shut Up and Dance, Alex Lothar, is part of the rescue team. That must be from a Black Mirror episode I haven't seen either. Great, this is reminding me yet again of all the television I haven't watched yet. I digress. He says, so the first two episodes and some of the third about Morrow, Prodigy, and the rescue team crossing paths with each other and the specimens. Which brings us to the xenomorph itself, which is realized wonderfully and is a real beast in the show, being very formidable in appearance and action, both being depicted as a stalked and an unstoppable killing machine against groups of multiple people at several points. Also surprisingly effective, he says, is how the show isn't afraid to really let you see the thing in pretty clear lighting. This is used to draw out the tension as it makes its presence known and really bring out the fear in its prey before going ham. The other specimens are done pretty well too. Not as much of a threat as the xenomorph yet, but they're certainly freaky, and one spider-like one is really horrific. The intrigue about where they all come from is good too, as the show isn't giving you all the context to how this fits into continuity yet. The show opened with a double bill, he says, but the third one included kind of creates the feeling of a pilot episode, giving you alien-specific action before setting up the main thrust of what seems to be the story, with one of the corporations getting their hands on the specimens and the other resolved to not let that be the end of it. The corporate influence on the alien story was always there with Weyland-Yutani, but this alien Earth is expanding on it, he says, with not only letting us meet the titular Yutani of this era, but also giving her competition with the Prodigy Corps, headed by a young trillionaire genius called Boy Cavalier, portrayed by another Black Mirror alum, Locke Henry's lead, Samuel Blanken, another episode of Black Mirror that I don't think I've watched. His area of expertise and focus is very different from Weyland-Yutani's, he says, though like Peter Weyland from Prometheus, his goals are very self-centered. This focus on Earth's corporate overlords may no doubt fuel continued speculation as to whether Alien and Blade Runner exist in the same universe, given their similarities in creator, subject matter, and even Ridley Scott saying it's possible. The visual style is true to the movies, at least with regards to how the tech is displayed, he says. There's some cleaner and more cutting-edge looking stuff, but I think that this makes sense in the context that this is Earth, the central hub of the power players, and specifically we get to see their bases, so it makes sense that they've had better quality stuff than off-planet colonies and haulage spaceships would. There's a suitable score to the show too, playing up the suspense and even using a few familiar-sounding melodies here and there, but the show also has some needle drops, specifically in how the episodes end, with the second one going to credits on a song by metal band Tool. Alright? The cast overall, he says, is a good mix of fresh and new faces, with the Prodigy group having a couple of characters who are a source of humor due to the unique nature of what they are and how they interact with other characters as a result. Another example of Hawley's sense of humor comes in a scene involving a themed costume party that is obviously absurd and very out of place seeming in this franchise, but this is used for some sharp satire, I guess, when the xenomorph crashes said party. Wendy and Joe are what would qualify as the protagonists, I guess, and their relationship is obviously going to be a core element of the story, but the show has juggled various viewpoints very, very well so far. Even Babu Sise as Morrow, who is a pretty ruthless agent of the company, is more of a pragmatist than a monster, and has an interesting personal turn as he learns something unexpected in the third episode that makes him have something in common with Ripley in the main series, and by virtue of being a cyborg, is subject to some form of discrimination in this world. One thing I think may be a weakness, though, he says, though is somewhat unavoidable in a TV show format, is how some characters have what feels like pretty strong plot armor in terms of their survival rate against the xenomorph across multiple encounters, especially in comparison to the people who we do see get absolutely destroyed by it. But overall, it's a good entry so far, and I'm intrigued to see where it goes. Yeah, and that's... I wonder that now when you say plot armor, like, are you talking about in relation to the people that get killed in the main storyline in the movies, because that's also where like dating and timing can also play a factor in terms of, all right, well, clearly Alien Earth is taking place now, as far as the production, right? Like it's being shot now. So is it a case where, the what you have to do in terms of playing up the xenomorph strengths, like you have to like make it stronger now than necessarily how it like I imagine it's not going to be as slow moving and as deliberate as Balahi Badejo's incarnation. He was the original African actor who was in the alien suit in 1979. Like the alien's going to move differently than that. So is that what it is? Where like, okay, you have to make it, you like you can't let it be like what it was. Like you have to update it is what I'm getting at. Like that's what I'm trying to say here. Like, is that what we're saying? Is that what you're saying? Where like the plot armor comes into play, or is it something else because it's a show? I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but either way, intriguing. Very intriguing, Stu. He says, that's it for this email. Maybe I'll give an updated review of the Absolute comics next time. The recent issues of Absolute Batman certainly kick things up several notches of intensity with its version of Bane. Jeez, take care, Stu. I keep hearing about this Absolute DC run. I keep hearing a ton of things about Absolute Batman and the Absolute Bane and stuff like that. So that's intriguing. Yeah, I look forward to hearing about that. But thank you for the King of the Hill and Alien Earth updates, Stu. Looking forward to seeing how Alien Earth shapes up for you and any other updates you got. All right, so next up is an email missive from Mr. Anthony Dorsey, but famous last words, this doesn't look as long as some of his other previous email missives have looked. We'll see. This one is titled Flight Chat Number 4 UCLA. I see it every day. I live here. I have no idea where that's from, but that's definitely going to be a quote from somewhere. Clever. But he says, hello there. I'm back again with what will probably be my last email missive for a while. Good news, I got a job. It's just part-time at my local Costco, but the pay is good and the hours are crazy. Well, that's good. Congratulations. That's been a struggle for you, Anthony. I know that you've been job hunting for a good while. Glad to hear that you are in the working world, good sir. For sure, even at a Costco. I mean, retail is retail, but work is work, so glad you got an income. He says, bad news, this means my film career is on hold since I couldn't find anything in it that would hire me. Good news again, I did have a connection from that film I did last year, and I might be joining that next month for its 2-day shoot in Raleigh if I can get off from Costco, since I mentioned it as a pre-scheduled event during my interview. So yeah, mostly good news to share today. But now it's time for some feedback and reviews and an announcement I'm excited for. Well, before I get into all of that, Anthony, I will say this, because I've noticed that you've talked about like your film career and, you're wanting to get in on the ground floor with some productions and whatnot. And I'm at this point where one of the things that I'm kind of advising people, especially now in the digital age, is to just start doing shit yourself. And I realize that that can be a difficult thing to do on like a low budget. You don't have, you're thinking in your head, you don't have a camera, you don't have equipment, you don't have this, you don't have that. But quite honestly, like iPhone or cell phone and whatnot, and like a couple of, an ability to upload footage. And I don't know how well versed you are in terms of editing, but I mean, nowadays they make prosumer and consumer non-linear editing software. You can edit video on TikTok these days using those programs and like CapCut and whatnot. So part of me really thinks that like, just because you're working at Costco doesn't mean that you have to close yourself off to whatever creative avenues you want to dive into with respect to filmmaking. And I realize you're trying to find a job, you're trying to build a career, but I feel like now more than ever, the independent avenues of being able to do so digitally, especially like on YouTube and over the internet in general, are wider than they ever have been. And you never know what opportunity can arise from making your own stuff and putting it up on the internet, like just putting it up yourself, basically making your own production. So that's something that I would extend as a possibility for you to think about. I mean, it is entirely up to you, whatever you want to do, however you want to pursue it, but I would not look at Costco as, well, I can only work at Costco or I can work on film. I feel like most of us find an opportunity to do both until we can get to a point where we only can do, or we only have to do one, the one that is our true passion in that regard. So just a thought with respect to what you're saying about the working world and filmmaking versus having a job and all that. But he says, please forgive any typos. I used Grammarly to proofread and they just introduced me to more AI features, or they just introduced more AI features, pardon me, and made the whole thing suck now. With respect to typos, yeah, I'll try and work through typos, but I have Grammarly as well, and I hear you about the AI features. I try not to use them. Like, I don't know, like, there's still, like, what it does, and then there's other AI features, like, that it asks, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Are you trying to angle for this? You're trying to angle for that? And, yeah, being it's weird. I'm in this weird place with AI, to be honest with you, because on the one hand, like, I am 100% against it in terms of, like, replacing creativity, and no, if you wrote that book using AI, you did not actually write a book and all that stuff. But I also see the other part of it where if it is actually used responsibly, because it can be used responsibly, but most people don't. Most people, like I said, the one guy I think I mentioned before, who was giving wrong box office numbers for Superman and comic book movies because ChatGPT was his source. Well, that's stupid. That's ignorant. Don't use ChatGPT as a source of information. But if you're using it to help hone what you're doing, or for grammatical help I can understand, right? As far as like a focus, but not inventing things. You still have to proof it. You still have to read it. Don't just use it as a catch-all, like, oh, hey, I'm going to let the computer do it for me. No, don't be lazy, right? There's a way to use it, not be lazy. I would say that. That being said, really don't think I've used any of the AI features for Grammarly just yet, for obvious reasons, because I want it to be my own shit in that regard. But either way, let's get into your reviews and the announcement that you said you were really excited for. So here we go, starting with movie reviews. He starts off with the Naked Gun, the reboot Naked Gun. Or actually, you know what? It's not a reboot. It's a continuation. It's a revival, right? Because he is connected. From what I can see in the trailers, he's connected to the original Leslie Nielsen, Frank Drebin character. So it's not a Naked Gun reboot. It's a Naked Gun revival. And he's got minor spoilers to talk about with it. He says, a welcome return from this classic parody film franchise. I haven't seen the originals, but I've seen Airplane, and they seem to be along the same line as the other Leslie Nielsen comedies. Liam Neeson fills the boots very well, playing a very silly man as seriously as he plays his action roles. His chemistry with Pamela Anderson was top-notch, and apparently they agree in real life, since they're supposedly in a relationship now. And she was great as a typical femme fatale from a classic detective film. The jokes throughout call back to those old-school parody films starring Nielsen, but also remind me of Mel Brooks' humor, like in Spaceballs. They also parody several tropes and plot devices from modern action films, such as Mission Impossible and Kingsman, and those had me bawling. Danny Houston was once again a great villain, playing it completely straight, even in the face of being given a ludicrously fake name, and Pam Anderson scatting on stage while the band is baffled. More movies like this, please. Just laughs from beginning to end of the credits, which features subtle hidden jokes and a very funny post-credit scene. Rating 8.5 out of 10. All right. That's the most comprehensive positive review I've heard for the Naked Gun revival, but I've been hearing a similar sentiment from everybody where like Dave the Film Junkie said that they knew the assignment. And that's the thing, like the Zucker brand of comedy, that's what this is, the Zucker brothers, right? They're the ones who created Airplane, they're the ones who created Police Squad, which is the original TV series that the Naked Gun was born out of back in the 70s, 80s, late 70s, early 80s, I think, right? But either way, like that type of comedy, that type of timing, those types of gags, and certainly spoofs, things that spoof off of other things, like you said, just hearing what you said that they spoof off of other action movies like Kingsman and Mission Impossible, it's like, okay, that's the formula. That's it. And if you understand that formula, then that's exactly what you're supposed to do with respect to a movie like this. And if they did that well, if that's what they executed properly with respect to this film, then I probably will enjoy it. I don't know when I'll get to see it. I'm not sure if it's one that I will see in theaters, but it is definitely one that I will check out at some point when I get the opportunity to do. Because I've seen the other Naked Guns. I've seen all three of them. And what you describe, Anthony, along with everybody else, like their sentiments on it, does sound like they understood the assignment very well with respect to, and Airplane is a great example. It's the same brand of comedy. It's from the same school, absolutely. Both of the Airplane movies fall right into that. And if this works, if this revival does well, in fact, truthfully here, let's go ahead and take a financial look at things, because all this box office talk with the comic book movies, and of course haven't really looked at some of the smaller stuff. I know that Weapons has been doing well. I know that like some of the other smaller films have been doing. F1, of course, has been a surprise for people. But here, where is the Naked Gun? See, it's not even on the main page. I have to search for it. This is ridiculous. Box Office Mojo is just stupid. Now that's one like overhaul design that just has never worked for me. Okay, so it's at 86.5 million worldwide. That's on a what is the budget for this movie? It can't be a huge budget because it's a smaller comedy. I know it did well like on its opening weekend, at least that's what I heard, but either way, like this is a movie here, now I've got to search for the budget because for whatever reason Box Office Mojo doesn't have the budget listed. So what does Google say the Naked Gun budget is? It says the budget was, oh, wow, 42 million. Okay, well that's a little bit higher in that regard, but either way, I'm hearing good things. Like I've heard people say good things about it, so I guess it just depends on whether or not Paramount and its new owners from Skydance want to continue it because it is a Paramount film. So we'll see. We will see how that goes. But I do want to watch it at some point. Again, I don't know if I'll get to see it in theaters, but it is one that I do want to watch at some point. That's definitely the most comprehensive positive review that I've heard from it. Now let's get to a TV series. All right, we're skipping here because this is not a movie. This is Peaky Blinders. Oh boy, he watched Peaky Blinders. Okay, let's see how much into spoiler territory he dives into this show that is on my list, but I have not watched yet. He says vague spoilers. Okay, all right, we'll see. I finally watched and finished this acclaimed series on Netflix starring Cillian Murphy. His portrayal of Tommy Shelby solidifies him as one of the best fictional characters on television. Following the trauma of being a tunneler in World War I, Tommy leads the Shelby family and the Peaky Blinders gang in Birmingham. He's a criminal mastermind, always with secrets and plans up his sleeve that would put Batman's prep time arguments to shame. Shots fired, huh? A violent, ambitious man who strives for peace, Cillian owns the show. The scene stealer, though, is Helen McCrory's Aunt Polly. Oh, Helen McCrory, may she rest in peace. The matriarch of the family, Polly is always the voice of reason, but is not always on the same side as Tommy. It's a shame that Helen McCrory passed before the final season as her presence was missed and her absence was felt. Rest in peace. Tommy's brothers Arthur and John are also very important, he says, very important characters, and go through unique trials and tribulations, especially Arthur, who is very volatile and has an addictive personality. Lizzie Stark was one of my favorite characters, but I can't say much due to spoilers. He also says they had plenty of great guest stars and season-specific characters, including Tom Hardy. I already know about his character, Alfie Solomon. Anya Taylor-Joy, Sam Neill, Sam Claflin, Aidan Gillen, and Adrian Brody. I knew about 3 or 4 that were in that. 3 or 4 of those names I knew was in the show. I did not know Anya Taylor-Joy was in the show. All right. Each season escalates the story, he says, and the Shelby's place in the underworld, from dealing with racetrack bookies to Italian and Irish gangs to Russian spies. And as they get closer to World War II, the fascists start to gain power with some eerily similar rhetoric to recent times. Yeah, unfortunately. Personally, I found the middle seasons to be the weakest, he says, with less interesting antagonists and a terrible fridging that ruined its season a bit for me. Oh, all right. The music throughout the series was very unique and fitting to the scenes with a British rock style. Listen to the theme song, Red Right Hand by Nick Cave, to see what I mean. Overall, this was a great show with an excellent final season that might have been the best season of them all. There's apparently a movie continuation in the works, and I can't wait for it. I don't know if I'd say it's one of the best shows ever. Again, I found a few seasons much less interesting than others, but an argument could be made for it to be a high place of the top 100 rating, 9 out of 10. Peaky Blinders is a show that I have seen the pilot, seen the first episode, and intriguing. It's not that I don't want to watch the show. It's just the list is so long. How many episodes of Peaky Blinders are there? Let's see. This is one, like, I think they're all on it. Okay, see, now this just makes me like, okay, like, why? All right, I'm expecting it to be like 60, 70 episodes. No, it's 36 episodes. Because, of course, it's a British series. What does that mean? In Britain, for people who don't know, the structure of television is different in the sense that for all the people that complain about 10-episode seasons, like here, yeah, you'd hate British TV in that regard. But it's funny, I never hear people complain about British TV seasons being as short as they are, because this is 6 series, if you will. They don't call them seasons, they call them series. They're 6 episodes apiece. 6 seasons, 6 episodes apiece. 36 episodes. Why have I not watched this? Why have I not watched this yet? I really need to get off my ass. Okay. Either way, so that's 36 episodes of an awesome series that was on BBC Two and BBC One that I need to watch. Totally need to watch. Yeah. I saw one clip. There's one clip. Well, I've seen a bunch of clips, but the one clip of it I saw that really raised my attention was the clip where he's telling all of his guys in the kitchen no fighting on his wedding day. Like that, I've seen that whole clip where he's like, nevertheless, John, Despite the bad blood, I'll have none of it on my carpet. Now, for Grace's sake, nothing will go wrong. Those bastards out there are her family, and if you effers do anything to embarrass her, your kin, your cousins, your horses, your effing kids, you do anything. Like, he launches into this whole thing, and at the end of it, he's just like, but the main thing is, you bunch of effers, despite the provocation from the cavalry, no fighting. Oi! No fighting. No effing fighting. No fighting. No effing fighting. And he's like, good. And then a dude bumps into him and he throws him like into the room. He throws him into the kitchen violently while other dudes like throw stuff at him. So it's like, okay, 3 minutes of telling your boys no fighting. Which there's a black dude in the middle of the group. I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, so what's the historical significance there? I did wonder of that culture. Like, one of the dudes in his group is black? Okay. How about that? So you would think that with what I just quoted, I would have seen the show. I haven't. I've just seen that scene like a lot of times because I find that scene entertaining. So I should get off my ass and watch the show, shouldn't I? Such a long list. All right, moving on. TV again. Eyes of Wakanda. Anthony watched Eyes of Wakanda. No spoilers for this one. He says this new anthology series was basically dropped with no fanfare by Marvel, even less than Ironheart got, which is disappointing. Yes, I agree. Quite disappointing, but unfortunately not surprising. Each of the 4 shorts tells a different story in the history of Wakanda war dogs retrieving vibranium from around the world, he says. Some are humorous, but mostly they play the story straight with some deep storytelling in such a short time for each episode. There were some great action scenes and good new characters, as well as the first canon appearance of a long-awaited character, though not the one people would expect, as well as some surprising influence from Terminator, Alien, and Predator at a certain point, wrapped up together, as well as a great tie-in to the first Black Panther film. Not the best MCU animated show, but I enjoyed it and it was worth a watch. Rating 7 out of 10. All right, so he gave it a little bit lower, but he still enjoyed it. Okay, yeah, and that's another one. Just, what the hell am I doing? Am I doing anything like productive as far as watching anything? No, I'm not, because just so much everybody else is watching that I am just continuing to not get caught up on. But either way, let's get back to movies here, because he's got 3 or 4 more reviews. Here we go. Next movie, Weapons. Oh, he saw Weapons. All right. Let's hear what he has to say about Weapons. The newest horror film from director Zach Cregger. I can't recall if I wrote to you about his last movie, Barbarian, when I watched it this year, but suffice to say, it was great. You might have. I don't remember. That was a while ago. That was a number of email messages ago, but you may have written about that. I've heard people say great things about Barbarian. He says, similar to Jordan Peele, Cregger was also part of a comedy group, The Whitest Kids You Know, before later moving into horror. While Barbarian was mostly horror before moving into some comedy in the second half, before going back to horror, Weapons is split into several different chapters, each focusing on a different character over a similar timeline, all focusing on what happened to the missing 17 kids from the same class who left their homes at 2:17 a.m. one night. Some chapters are tense, scary, funny, creepy, intriguing, sad, or some combo of the above, he says. Julia Garner and Josh Brolin lead the film very well, with one Brolin scene especially going from scary to tragic to scary again, then funny, all in quick succession. Wow, that's a crazy whiplash effect. He says the biggest standout from the cast, though, is Carrie Christopher, who plays Alex, the one boy in class who didn't leave that night. Some moments in the film can feel jarring with how humorous it can be, but I felt that it was all perfectly paced, and often while laughing, I still had that lingering sense of dread about what's coming next. Highly recommend, rating 9 out of 10. Wow, highly recommended that. Okay, well, I've heard glowing things about Weapons. They were talking about it on Vodka Stream. Dave has seen it. Paul, one of the guests on there, has seen it. So, like, I've heard great things. And, you know, as far as Zach Cregger, you know, like comedian turned horror director, yes, definitely, I guess, like going like the Jordan Peele school, if you will, right? Now, I've seen all of Peele's movies. Like, I've seen Get Out, I've seen Us, I've seen Nope. In fact, I own all of them in glorious steelbook form. And I'm curious about Weapons. I am. I'm also a little curious about Barbarian. And part of me wants to see Barbarian first to kind of get an idea of what Cregger's style is like before seeing Weapons. So we'll have to see how that works out. But just add it to the list. Add it to the ever-growing list. Add this next one to the list, too. I was trying to see this in a doubleheader with highest to lowest a week or so ago, and it didn't work out. But Anthony saw Nobody, too. Here's his review of it with no spoilers. He says the first Nobody was basically what if John Wick was played by old man Saul Goodman. Yeah, pretty much. This sequel is basically that, but this time he's on vacation, and he'll keep reminding the people he's fighting that he's just a family man on vacation. There's some good action set pieces, especially the one in the third act at the carnival, and it had some good humor throughout. But honestly, it felt mostly uninteresting with few original action beats, unlike the first one, which had the very memorable bus scene. This one does that again, but on water. I do think Bob Odenkirk fits the role well, but leaning more into him being an assassin full-time instead of a normal man with a secret past and crazy skills sort of ruins the fun on this franchise. Rating 6 out of 10. Well, that's a bit harsher, but I have to remember that there's some critical movies that Anthony and I disagree on. He despises Age of Ultron. I do not despise it. I just think it's mid. And he certainly does not like Rise of Skywalker, and I still do, even though we largely agree on the sequel trilogy. A lot of other things about the sequel trilogy, even though I still reside on that island of there are no bad Star Wars movies. He does not reside on that island, so I have to remember that. We don't always agree on things, agree to disagree. It's all subjective. I haven't seen Nobody 2 yet. I don't expect it to be as good as the first one. I don't, because sequels rarely are in that regard. And I know that John Wick kind of subverts that a little, although I will say that even though I enjoy all 4 of the John Wick movies, the first one is probably still my favorite without question, because it's the freshest one, it's the new one. But the other 3 do up the ante, and I do wonder if Nobody 2 does that or not. He says it's uninteresting, so I'm curious as to what might be uninteresting in that regard when I do see it. We'll have to see exactly when I get to see that one as well. But next up, let's see. This is an older one. Okay, RDJ, The Judge, 2014. He says, I went back and watched this film, which was one of the few movies that RDJ starred in after the MCU got going, and I believe he did this while his Marvel contract was up and we weren't sure he'd return. How wrong we were. Also starring Robert Duvall as the titular judge, Downey plays his son, who returns home reluctantly and ends up having to defend his father in a murder trial. I had seen the trailer for this. Yes, it did look intriguing. Duvall and Downey have excellent chemistry together, he says, as they deal with the current trial, their past, and disease. The movie also starred Vincent D'Onofrio and Jeremy Strong as Downey's brothers, and Vera Farmiga as a former love of his from high school. I was surprised to see The Judge with a 49% on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't understand this, he says. While it can be a bit predictable and formulaic, the acting and cinematography were also absolutely top tier. This might end up being remembered as Robert Duvall's last great film, as the movies he's done since then I've barely even heard of. This was simply a great father-son movie and is potentially tear-jerking, very much worth a watch if you're in the mood. It could be a good Father's Day movie next year, rating 8.5 out of 10. Well, remember, Anthony, Rotten Tomatoes, the hell site as I call it, still thinks that Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is what, 27% right here? Let's do a check on the hell site, right? I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, obviously, but, just an update, just reminding people why you can't really trust the hell site Rotten Tomatoes all the time, and really shouldn't trust it at all. You should make up your own damn mind. Yeah, 28% rotten for Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Yeah, that's bullshit. I remember at one point it had Die Hard with a Vengeance, the third Die Hard movie with Samuel L. Jackson, at 51% rotten. Now it's at 60% fresh. That's still bullshit. It should be higher than that. It's the best one in the franchise. That's not the first one, in my opinion. It's my favorite by far, to be honest with you. Oh, and the first live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that was released in 1990. Here, we're going to go back to the 90s a bit for a second, back to John's email. That was re-released in theaters recently for its 35th anniversary. Why is the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie from the Jim Henson Creature Shop, why is that 35 years old? Whatever. It's 46% rotten. Bullshit. 81% for the audience, right? So Rotten Tomatoes is garbage. We can't be beholden to whatever its ratings are. And I'm not saying you are, Anthony. I'm just saying whatever they have rated for The Judge, whatever. Trailer to me looked interesting. At some point after I get caught up on everything else, I'll watch it, which I'm sure you figure means I'll never watch it. But it is what it is. But yeah, I would not pass judgment on that. As far as how Rotten Tomatoes has it rated in that regard. Look, Elio was rated certified fresh. That bombed. That was another Pixar bomb, so it doesn't matter, right? And I probably will enjoy Elio when I do watch it because it's a Pixar movie. I have to watch it. It's a Pixar film. But I'm just saying, there's all manner of subjective inconsistency with Rotten Tomatoes. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that they didn't like The Judge. You would think so, but no, not quite, not all the time. But that's it for your review. So here's the announcement. You said, lastly, before signing off, I want to talk about the announcement of the newest Lego game, Lego Batman: Legacy of the Dark Knight. Yes, indeed. Following the rumors, it seemed to me that this would be similar to the Skywalker saga and that it would have you play through all the Batman movies as separate chapters while excluding Batfleck. Yeah, which that last part kind of bummed me out because you didn't see any Batfleck stuff in the trailer. But he says this is not the case. The game is actually an amalgamation of the history of Batman on film and elsewhere into one cohesive storyline, featuring an open world Gotham City and at least 7 playable characters: Batman, Jim Gordon, Catwoman, Robin, Nightwing, Batgirl, and Talia al Ghul. The trailer featured heavy references to the TDK trilogy and the Batman, as well as character designs and references from the Keaton films. Watching the trailer and the gameplay demo, there are also numerous references to the comics and the Arkham games, such as Explosive Gel and Riddler trophies. The level they demoed at Gamescom is at Ace Chemicals and featured the Red Hood gang designs from Snyder and Capullo's Zero Year. Scott Snyder, not Zack Snyder, just in case anybody was like that isn't aware of Scott Snyder, the comic writer, because somebody listening may not know that. Just clarifying that. And I've read Zero Year. I actually have read Zero Year. I read it before the Batman a couple of years ago. He says, in the gameplay I watched, the Joker, known there as Red Hood 1, quoted and paraphrased many iconic quotes from the films, and I'm sure at some point they'll sneak a Leto quote or two in. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. There are numerous costumes and vehicles in the game, and I've seen someone say that the BVS and Arkham Knight Batmobiles are included. While it's clear that they won't recount the events of BVS or Justice League since they don't want Superman or any other Justice League hero, that iteration will not be ignored as feared. Well, that's good, because, yeah, I feel like the Superman tie-in, because, again, as I've said many times before, Batfleck is the only version live-action of Batman that actually had to share the screen and share a universe with Superman until we get to the DCU Batman, right? So all of the others, it's easier, because they all had solo films by themselves, and they weren't tied to a universe that involved Superman. That's not to say they couldn't have been. Like, they could have been a Superman in Keaton's universe. There could have been a Superman maybe in Bale's universe. I feel like that's even too nihilistic for a Superman to exist there. But people were talking about that, especially after Superman Returns released in 2006. And regardless of how many people are willing it to happen in existence, there isn't one in Pattinson's universe. So it's easier to tell a Batman-centric story just by sticking to those instead of including Affleck, because, yeah, that is a Batman built and made, if you will, to be in a Superman universe. So I get it, but you're saying that they're not going to ignore it. There's going to be aspects of him that will be in there. Good, awesome. The story I totally get, but yeah, there's other parts of Batfleck, just so long as he's not ignored completely. That is a good thing. He says the gameplay itself seems Arkham-inspired, and some LEGO game elements are more similar to the Skywalker saga than any game before it. This also seems in part to be a LEGO Batman reboot, separating itself from the previous timeline of LEGO Batman 1 through 3 and DC supervillains, and could potentially be the start of a new modern trilogy or more, with the next game bringing in Superman and the Justice League once again, taking inspiration from their movies like this game does with Batman's film story. I'm very much looking forward to this game releasing sometime in 2026, allegedly. He says that with a bit of snark. Until next time, may the force be with you, Anthony Dorsey. And that is it for Anthony's email missive. And I'm with him. The Lego Batman trailer looks awesome, and I am looking forward to it. But it also reminds me of video games that I am not caught up on, like the Skywalker saga. And that doesn't mean I haven't played Lego Star Wars. It just means that I've never played the Skywalker saga, because I know they released it as one complete thing, and I've never played any of the stuff beyond Episode 6. I played the original versions of Lego Star Wars and Lego Star Wars 2. That's it. In fact, I don't even think I played them on Xbox. I'm pretty sure I played them on GameCube, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that. The last Lego game I played religiously was probably Lego Indiana Jones. Yep, I haven't even played the Lego Batman ones like that. I played a little bit of them, but not like that. So, yeah. So much media. Like, how do I even have time to do this? This is why, I need to, move away from a traditional 9 to 5 atmosphere and just become like if there was any way that I could just content create for a living, like so many people do, and that was all I had to do, was just, then I can consume content and talk about it. That if I could do that for a living, seriously, that is what I would do. I do it for fun and I enjoy doing it now, but man, I wish that was my career. No joke about it. Which is funny, because I feel like some of you might be like, isn't that why you're doing this? Are you trying to do that? Well, it is what it is. It's been 9 years, and you still work towards that stuff. But there's just so much shit to watch and so much stuff to play and all that. How does anybody ever get caught up on that? But either way, thank you, as always, for the email, Mrs. Anthony. Congratulations again on the new job. Hope that really works out for you. And like I said, with respect to your film aspirations, if there is a way that you can do some stuff independently yourself while working this job at Costco, I would recommend doing that to try and keep your aspirations and your thoughts with respect to a film career like in the not in the rear view but in the front view, like so many people have done and so many people continue to do, because I feel like that's really the best way for most of us, all of us working class individuals, to do it going forward, to be honest with you, until we get to that point where we can claim film as our, 9 to 5, if you will, or as our primary source of income is really the best way that I should put it, because film crews and whatnot are certainly not 9 to 5, not in the traditional sense by any sense of the imagination. But thank you as always for the feedback, Anthony, and whenever you do send your next email missive, we look forward to it. All right, next up, Alex De Silva chimes in this week with Flight Chat number 16. There has been an awakening. Have you felt it? Is that, yeah, that's the trailer, first teaser trailer for Force Awakens. I'm pretty sure that's where that line comes from. But the summary, the Gemini summary says that Alex shared observations about Jeff Snyder's behavior and his own decision to unfollow podcasts discussing scoops. He also shared canon tidbits from a rewatch of Peacemaker Season 1 and discussed episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. All right, so I think we may end up having a canon discussion here with Peacemaker, but let's see what Alex has to say about everything. He says, "Hey, Ray, so Jeff Snyder's latest meltdown. Yikes. He sounded really unhinged in that one. He has beef with James Gunn, so he threatens to spoil the Batman Part 2 for the rest of us? Strange logic there." Then I came across a thread in the DCU subreddit about that very same Snyder rant. But the crazy part, Snyder created a Reddit burner account, username IndependentWord819, so that he could respond to people in that thread. And yes, it's as bad as it sounds. I'll post some gems here from Mr. Snyder himself. Remember, all of these posts are him responding to other people. Because of that, I've slightly edited some posts just so context makes sense, but all of these capture the spirit of his original posts. Anyway, without further ado, here are the latest crazy things Snyder has said. Quote, "If Gunn wanted to be challenged, he'd say this shit on Twitter instead of hiding on BLUESKY and Threads and all these other bullshit platforms that cropped up to make losers feel safe." Wow. So, Gunn should go on the South African Nazi hell site filled with toxic assholes like himself, Jeff Snyder that is, if he really wanted to be challenged. No, that's like going on Jubilee and, sitting yourself in a room full of 20 idiots and racists and bigots, which Jubilee is just, don't get me started on how bullshit that platform is. Whatever. But yeah. Okay, so that's a great start from Jeff Snyder's reactions. Okay. Next, quote, "When the studio puts all this shit in the trailer a few days before release, nothing can really be spoiled, can it? Yes, it can, and there's NDAs and lawyers, and they will sue your ass into oblivion, and I really hope they do that, because you don't deserve to have a career, Jeff Snyder." This next quote, "What I'm doing, fighting fire with fire. What I'm doing is fighting fire with fire. Gunn uses his massive platform to punch down, so I think I'll continue to use mine to punch up and remind Jimbo that the press has the power. We're the boss, not him." Oh, screw you, Jeff Snyder. You are not the press. Scoopers are not the press. Scoopers are glorified press. They think they're press. You have no power. You have no legitimacy. You have no credibility. I'm getting close to the rant that I did the other day, and some just don't, over on Patreon, but fire with fire. Gunn doesn't punch down, okay? But it's certainly not now. Gunn has built up more fans. He had fans from Guardians of the Galaxy. He's now got more fans from Superman. This idea that he punches down, yeah, that's absolute garbage. He is so scared of how Scooper Madness is just losing its credibility thanks to Gunn destroying all their lies and all their bullshit scoops. This last quote, where he says, "I'm a nutcase who dared to talk back to the millionaire studio head? Yep, guilty as charged. Welcome to journalism, something you know nothing about." And Alex says, yeah, this guy is unwell. Oh, he's extremely unwell. The fact that he believes any of that bullshit, he is an absolute atrocious, pathetic excuse for a human being. And you know what? Again, I am not a fan of David Zaslav. I'm not rooting for David Zaslav as a person in the slightest. He's a terrible human being. But I absolutely am rooting for his lawyers to crush the shit out of Jeff Snyder. Because that's just, horrible. Absolutely horrible. But and the fact that he created another account on Reddit just to argue with other people in a subreddit that has now banned him for being a complete bullshit artist. Wow, that is just, it is the height of unhinged, and it shows you the height of fear. The fact that he's clapping back like this, he is deathly afraid that his livelihood, his journalistic integrity is on the verge of being wiped out because Scooper Madness has no journalistic integrity. They are not journalists. They are liars at worst and spoilers at best. They don't report shit. They have no integrity. They're not objective. They interject their bullshit ass opinions into everything, and Chattanooga FBI and his ilk are not long for this world as long as people like James Gunn stand up to their lies and their bullshit that they've been peddling for however many years. Alex went on to say another thing that he said recently, Snyder that is, Jeff Snyder, is how his job as a scooper doesn't make him a person who spoils things because, according to him, most people can predict how movies will end anyway. I mean, what an incredibly arrogant thing to say. Oh, beyond arrogant, Alex. The height of arrogance to say that. This rant of his was really the last straw for me, he says. Up until then, I'd been tolerating some podcasts on my feeds that engage with Scooper Talk, but like Snoke says in episode 7, I've had an awakening. Oh, so that's where the quote comes from. Any podcast that devotes airtime to discussing scoops and rumors is getting an unfollow from me, he says. I've actually unfollowed a couple I've been listening to for years just because any mention of scoops and rumors has been starting to really rub me the wrong way. That's not what I listen to these podcasts for, so I'm purging them from my feed. I'm not saying this is some sort of gotcha to these podcast creators. They're free to talk about whatever they'd like on their shows. But by the same token, I'm free to stop listening to their shows for whatever damn reason I want. Podcasts for me, Alex says, are supposed to be an enjoyable, fun thing to keep my mind occupied while I'm busy with another task, like driving or doing the dishes, so I will not be putting up with podcasts that bring up things that tick me off and raise my blood pressure. So long, suckers. Yeah, I'm right there with you. In fact, truthfully, like before I really got into podcasting like actively back in the Squadcast Media days, there was a podcast that I did listen to, and I still get updates. They post every Monday morning, like on my way to work, I'll get an update like, oh, they posted a new episode. It was two guys that did a podcast called The Greatest Generation. It was recommended to me by an old coworker. This is pre-pandemic days, if you will. An old coworker that is a fellow Trekkie recommended it to me because they were going through all of the episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. And it was a hilarious podcast. It was an entertaining podcast. It was an enjoyable podcast. And then I remember one day they made a crack about Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And it was in the midst of all of the, the angst and the hoopla. This might have even been before I created FLITEcast. But that really rubbed me the wrong way. I continued it for a little bit longer, maybe into in fact, actually, this was after I created FLITEcast, because I remember I listened to a bit of their thoughts when Star Trek Discovery started, because they were talking a little bit about that show as well, and I'm sure they've continued on. They've gotten big, and they do the sponsorship thing, and I'm sure their numbers have increased. I don't know where they're at now, but I stopped listening to them. And by the whole, there's a lot of podcasts. There's some that I do still listen to, but not as much as I used to, because I just don't need that nonsense. And we were talking about Snyder a little bit, Jeff Snyder, on Vodka Stream the other night, and William from Sci-Fi Center was saying that there are higher ups, there are higher people that actually use Jeff Snyder and Scooper Madness as a source, and it's that's awful. I hate that. And I've seen plenty of rags. I've seen plenty of different publications and blogs use them as sources. It's that is the kiss of death, guys. I know you're doing this because it drives up clicks and attention to your site, but these scoops don't pan out. They end up being bullshit 90% of the time. Every once in a while, a broken clock is right twice a day, and that's maybe as many times as Jeff Snyder or any of these morons, whether it's Disgrace or Umberto and the Rap and whatnot, that they've been right. Why follow any of them whatsoever? No, it's Scooper Madness is awful and full of no credibility whatsoever, and more people should do exactly what you're doing, Alex, and choose to unfollow them, because scoops, like I said, once again, they are spoilers at best, lies at worst. So that's really the long and short of it. That's as much as I have to say with respect to that. So I applaud you for your awakening, good sir. Thank you for that. He says, speaking of fun and enjoyable, let's now transition this email to happier things. I have only good, positive, and upbeat things to say for the remainder of this email, so let's dive right in. Okay, here we go. So that means his Peacemaker talk is good and uplifting. He says, I finished my rewatch of Peacemaker Season 1, as well as the companion podcast with Gunn, Here's some tidbits I got from the remaining episodes. He says Gunn confirms Matter Eater Lad is canon in the DCU. Gunn confirms that Superman does not indeed have a feces fetish. However, it is canon that Peacemaker thinks he does. Yes, okay. I think I remember him saying that. He says the character of Clemson Myrn is canon, but this doesn't rule out us seeing Chukwudi Iwuji as a different character in the DCU going forward. Gunn vaguely suggested we might see him return as a non-humanoid character in the future. Yeah, we know he loves working with Chuck. I mean, Clemson Myrn aside, he also cast him as the High Evolutionary in Guardians Volume 3, which he was terrifyingly awesome in that particular movie. And also, there was that story that came out, where Gunn revealed, and I don't know if you say this later, no, I don't think so, but Gunn revealed that he originally wrote the character of Clemson Myrn for the late, great Lance Reddick, and scheduling just didn't work out in that regard. So, yeah, there's plenty of opportunities for him to bring Chuck back and have him be officially a part of the DCU, because he's not yet. He's part of the DCEU, but not part of the DCU, so that would be cool. I do like the possibility of that still being open. He says Kite Man is canon in the DCU. Oh, we know that now for sure, thanks to Peacemaker Season 2, Episode 1, because there is a Kite Man reference there. So yes, he is canon in the DCU. Gunn confirmed that he feels a lot more free with characters like Peacemaker and Vigilante as compared to characters like Superman. Yeah, absolutely, and I understand why, because Superman has a pedigree and an expectation about him as a character that Peacemaker and those characters do not have the same, reverence, if you will. So yeah, he can be more free with them. When asked about Flash and Wonder Woman, Gunn responded he doesn't know. He said eventually they'll be canon, but that he doesn't know yet. Well, we know that Wonder Woman will be canon. I guess what we don't know is which Flash is going to be canon and how Flash is going to be incorporated, right? And that's... I answered a question on TikTok earlier this week about which one would I want to see, on the big screen first, Barry Allen or Wally West. And I said Barry Allen because we haven't had enough time cinematically with Barry Allen. And I feel like Flash fans should get some time with Barry Allen on the big screen, like I've had as a Batman fan with Bruce Wayne, or, even now what we're getting with Superman fans with Clark Kent. And I realize that Wally West has, like a big following with respect to the comics and also, I guess, in the DCAU, which that's another reason why I need to go back and watch the DCAU, all the shows that I have not watched, because Wally West, I guess, is big as the Flash in the DCAU. I don't know. I'm not sure how that goes exactly. But yeah, Flash at some point will probably be made canon for sure. When Peacemaker is at the middle school for the show and tell, a little girl tells him she thinks she's his illegitimate daughter. Gunn confirms this is probably true. Interesting. Okay. Because a little bit of that was also in the flashback for Peacemaker Season 2, Episode 1. He says Green Arrow is mentioned in the finale, but Gunn confirms that character is currently not in the DCU system. Sounds like we won't be seeing any sort of Green Arrow character anytime soon. Yeah, I get that. That makes sense. He can be further down the road. And finally, Alex says the biggest and perhaps most obvious one, the Justice League at the end, is not canon. Oh, we know that for sure. We know that now. Definitely, emphatically, because that's what started this whole debate where so many people don't know what the word retcon actually means in the last 48 to 72 hours, that's for sure. He says, and those were the most notable canon tidbits. Nothing earth-shattering, but I wasn't listening to the podcast solely for canon details anyway. I was genuinely interested in hearing some behind-the-scenes stories, and the podcast did not disappoint in that department. The small canon bits were just little bonuses for me. After watching Superman, he says, the scene of Peacemaker killing the Butterfly's giant cow monster at the end takes on a whole new context. If Clark were there, he would have insisted on a peaceful solution that involved keeping the cow alive and well. He's right. He's absolutely right. Okay, good. This next sentence answers a question for me that I wasn't sure. I was trying to dance around what I was saying here. But Alex says, it's also interesting that the premiere of Season 2 started with a previously in the DCU with reshot scenes from Season 1. I don't think I've ever seen someone reshoot scenes just for a previously on. And in this case, the scene where Leota calls Waller about the Justice League gets changed to her calling about the Justice Gang. The scene where Peacemaker references Green Arrow is changed to a reference to Green Lantern, and obviously the Justice League scene gets changed to include Superman, Mr. Terrific, Hawkgirl, Green Lantern, and Supergirl. Yes, indeed, because again, previously in the DCU. So, again, one more time for the cheap seats. I said this in Flightbox. I will continue to reiterate this. People can call it semantics if they like, but what we saw in that scene was not a retcon. It was the DCU version of how season 1 ended. So the events of season 1 with Project Butterfly went almost identically in the DCU as it did in the DCEU, with slight changes, that being one of the slight changes. That is how we're supposed to take it, seriously. And anything else that gets confirmed or denied as far as being in the DCU, Gunn will go to that. Gunn will explain that to us, or he will present that if necessary. So, yeah, I don't know why it's so hard for people to understand that. Alex, it seems like you understand that. Like you said, you don't think you've ever seen someone reshoot scenes just for a previously on. Well, he did, and I think in his case it makes sense because one, it wasn't as much work, and two, it's important because when you do a previously on, you're trying to establish that, you're in a new universe. Things are different now. And that part of canon, the Justice League is a big one. Like, I understand reshooting that one because you have to establish that in the DCU there's no Justice League yet. There's a Justice Gang right now. And Superman and Supergirl are clearly, like, affiliated with that. So maybe they are part of the Justice Gang at this point in time, right? We saw them, obviously, with Superman and helping Superman out in the movie. So, yeah. But to me, that was a big one that I think made sense. And then other smaller ones we will find out as we go forward. And I'm perfectly okay with that. I don't understand why people are, making a big deal out of that and, calling it a retcon and whatnot, but it's whatever. Toxic fan discussions. No more positive, no more positivity going forward. All right. He says, and finally, this week for the Next Generation, I watched 2 rather excellent episodes. To be honest, I didn't take many mental notes to include in this email because I was just sort of engrossed in watching them. First up was Legacy. Oh, all right. Tasha's sister, yes. Okay, what's up with that visor Data always wears during poker games? Is that something professional players actually use? Yes, it is. I mean, it's a bit stereotypical, and I don't think that professional players wear it so much now, but it definitely is a thing. Like that's a thing that like dealers have worn, like, in terms of like the iconography of poker playing, like over the years and whatnot. This next one, he's like, no, I wanted so badly for Ashara to be legit. It would have been so cool to have her join the Enterprise crew and carry on her sister's legacy. I definitely wouldn't mind seeing more of her in the future. Well, Alex, I hear you. I'll go ahead and tell you there will be no more of Ashara. That is it. So I'm sorry, but I don't want you to get your hopes up. I don't want you to hope that Ashara would return. No, that is it. They did not go further with that. I hear you though. That would have been intriguing if they had, brought back a Yar element to that senior staff, because there's always going to be that what if Tasha was a part of the crew going forward. How would the show have gone? How would things have evolved? How would have changed character arcs? Yes, totally understand that, but no, this is it for the Yar legacy, sadly. Next up was Reunion. Oh, wow. Yeah, this episode. Another great episode, he says, and another important one for Worf. Reunion had it all. Love, honor, murder, vengeance, fatherhood. A very satisfying story. Yes, almost as satisfying as Redemption Parts 1 and 2. I'll leave that. You'll get there. That's the season 4 finale and the season 5 premiere. You'll get there when you get to that 2-parter. But yeah, remember Reunion when it comes to those episodes because they tie in very cleanly, if you will. But yeah, next up is Future Imperfect, he says. Ooh, that's a good bottle episode. I like that one. Live long and prosper, Alex. Alex, thank you as always for the feedback. Greatly appreciated. Thank you for the good thoughts. And again, I salute you on your awakening about Scoopers and, not listening to any of their bullshit, any of their lies or their spoiling going forward. And finally, we'll close out this flight chat with an email from Jared Cardos. He says, hey Ray, hope you're doing well. So before I get into the most recent episodes, I wanted to shout out a couple of things, starting with a new game that was announced. He's going to announce Lego Batman here too. He said this past weekend was Gamescom, one of the other big preview events in gaming, and while there was some pretty cool stuff, the one I had to shout out here was Lego Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight, which from the looks of it has a story that combines bits and pieces of some of the more beloved and or funny aspects of Batman movies with an open world Gotham and combat that's similar to the Batman Arkham games. Needless to say, I am 1000% sold. Need this in my life immediately. Yeah, so you, me, and Anthony, yes, we're all definitely very much looking forward to that. Allegedly, as Anthony put it, in 2026. But Jared says, something that you can pick up right now, though, is a recent run of Star Trek comics that I've been making my way through that feels like it was made specifically for you. I can't say too much about the plot without spoiling things for the people doing their first time watches. I will say it's set in between Nemesis and the events that start the Kelvin timeline. Oh, intriguing. And has Benjamin Sisko after the events of Deep Space Nine with a crew of other characters from across Trek history with their own ship on a mission that starts with investigating the deaths of godlike beings across the galaxy and only gets crazier from there. The series also spawned a spin off called Star Trek Defiant, which stars Worf on a similar mission but with a more morally complex crew doing things in ways more outside the Federation. The writers, Colin Carey and Jackson Lansing on Trek, and Christopher Cantwell on Defiant, really know their lore and create some very compelling stories for these characters. I'm not as familiar with the artists, but it's also pretty good. They managed to make each characters look and feel like them without making them feel stiff or like they just drew from reference photos, which can happen on licensed books like this. I'm not super deep into it, just a couple of trades into Trek, one in Defiant, and a crossover event called Day of Blood, but I think this is definitely one to keep an eye on. Is this a new book, or has this been out for a minute? I don't know. I wasn't sure exactly from how you were describing whether or not it was. You said it's a recent run of Star Trek comics, but here, let me Google search this real quick. Okay, so according to Memory Alpha, the Star Trek wiki, Star Trek Day of Blood, which is from the writers you mentioned here, that was a 6 issue. Let's see, it's a crossover miniseries from IDW Publishing consisting of 3 standalone issues and 2 issues each from IDW's Star Trek and Star Trek Defiant series. This apparently was published 2 years ago, May of 2023 to September of 2023. Time span 2378. Yes. So yeah, interesting. Like you said, after Nemesis, but just before the events that start the Kelvin timeline, which, yeah, that would have been what, 2380, 2381, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, exactly. And it's such an interesting dichotomy, if you will, with respect to the timeline and the Kelvin timeline in that regard. So yeah, when we talk about recent here, let's see, IDW Star Trek series, like how long does this go? So there was a series that published from October 2022 to June of this year. Wait a minute, so is it still going, or did it end? Did it end in June of this year? Was the last issue this year? I don't know. Let's see. So it does look like it just recently ended, but at least according to this, from what I'm seeing in Memory Alpha, 32 issues plus 2. That's what it's saying. So I guess it's those crossovers that it was talking about. The series is set in the same continuity as Star Trek Year 5 and also spun off Star Trek Defiant. Star Trek Year 5. Oh, wow. Look at this. Okay, so clearly, Jared, there's a lot of IDW Star Trek comics that I have never read that I need to look into. Yeah, that's a good idea. There was an omnibus there was a collection rather of Star Trek comics that I read when I was a kid. It was another comic book trade that I was given as a Christmas present. That's called The Best of Star Trek, but it was specifically written by Mike W. Barr. And it was a collection of Star Trek comics that was primarily original series, but it wasn't like just the original, like from the show. It was also like going into things that happened in between the movies, right? Specifically, the original series movies, right? There were a number of comics. There was one where they're aboard the Excelsior, and he's still an admiral, and Savick is involved, and they have a Horta from the original series that plays a lieutenant, and there was another one called The Trial of James T. Kirk, which was like 3 issues, and it was basically Kirk being put on trial by the Klingons and other races. The Klingons and the Nazgul, I think, put him on trial, but they got witnesses from like other planets that they had visited during the original series, like Bella Oxmix from A Piece of the Action, and Leonard James Zakar, who was from Capella. That's right, Capella 4 in the episode Friday's Child in the original series. Yes, that's right. I'm trying to remember all this from the top of my head. Like, it was a really cool trade paperback set, but that was when Star Trek was a DC property, because yes, DC did have Star Trek, the Star Trek license, for a good while. I think we probably talked about that before, but IDW has had it recently, and I read the Spectrum War. I forget who gave that to me. I forget how I was clued into that one. It might have been the guys at Squadcast Media that sent me that. They might have sent me the Spectrum War, but it was a Star Trek Green Lantern crossover, specifically Kelvin Timeline Star Trek Green Lantern crossover, and that was really good. So yeah, I have never dug fully into the IDW Star Trek comics. Perhaps I should just go ahead and Add that to the list of media that I gotta get caught up on. All right, this cover does look cool too. I don't know how canon any of this stuff is, especially with respect to Benjamin Sisko, because Starfleet Academy had an interesting graphic that I advise Amr and Alex do not pay attention to with respect to the fate or the future of Benjamin Sisko. But either way, very interesting to see this. This does look cool. But all right, moving on to the rest of your email. He says, now on your most recent flight cast, you asked who was renting the digital copy of Superman instead of spending the extra $5 to own it, and I rented Superman this past weekend. You did? Really? But it was $5 more. You would have been able to buy it. You'd have had it, the digital. He says, to be fair, I had already pre-ordered the steelbook, so I was going to get a digital code from that. Also, within that 48 hours, I was able to get my money's worth by watching it 2 to 3 times, one of which was with my family, who were originally going to come with me during the early preview, but I had to cancel at the last minute. They all liked it, by the way. It's funny, my dad actually had a similar reaction to what I think you said Shonda had with, was Green Lantern supposed to be such an asshole? Yeah, yes, indeed. Okay, all right. If you feel that you got your money's worth out of it, Jared, awesome. And like you said, you've got the steelbook pre-ordered, so do I. I'm holding out. I am. I would have loved to have like either bought or rented it now and like watched it, like to my heart's content. Digitally, I am waiting to get that code. I'm waiting for the physical one that comes out. That's going to be September 23rd is the release date that I was notified by email about. So yeah, waiting for that. And then at that point, yes, I will join the digital revolution that has been enjoying Superman for the past a week or so in that regard. But glad that you got your money's out of it, good sir. The news about Zack Snyder's The Last Photograph, he says, was pretty interesting and exciting to hear, unless I'm missing something. This will be the first time Snyder makes a non-genre film, though it sounds like there could be some supernatural or horror elements. I'll definitely keep a close eye on it. I'm also curious about what the big project will be after this, and I'm not hoping that the UFC thing gets pushed to the side, but rather it is no longer affiliated with that company. I mean, it's not like UFC has a monopoly on mixed martial arts, and I know Snyder can make some cool-looking fights in that arena. That's a good point, Jared. Just so long as it isn't affiliated necessarily with Dana White and those politically aligned with him, right? Like, as long as that's not a thing, I'm good with it there. Because Warrior with Tom Hardy and Joel Edgerton, that wasn't UFC affiliated, was it? I don't think it was. And that's certainly mixed martial arts, and that was really good. That was a really good movie, truthfully. Really enjoyed that. So yeah, I'm with you on that. You're right. Licensing is a bigger concern, not the movie itself, for sure. He says, finally, as for the new season of Peacemaker, it's an excellent start. To get it out of the way, the switch up from the Justice League to the gang in the last season was about what I expected, and it works to thread the needle between the first season and the quasi-DCU to the one set firmly in the DCU. As for the episode in general, it really sets up an interesting story for Chris in regards of where he is and what he wants in life. I'm curious to see what this other world is like. What other differences there are, because I get the feeling it's more sinister than it initially appears, I agree. And what roles the other 11th Street kids play in it. I'm also really interested to see where Harcourt, Adebayo, and Economos goes in this season. I think that'll be enough for this episode. Thanks for reading as always, and looking forward to your future episodes. Thank you, Jared, as always, for the feedback. I am totally with you. Honestly, with respect to where this is going to go with season 2, it's going to be a case where the 11th Street kids want to get him back to the DCU Earth, if you will, the DCU universe in that regard, right? But, what is his motivation going to be? Is it simply going to be that he's going to, has to do the right thing, right? So he's had so much that has been taken from him in his life. He's had is it an awful origin story? Is that really going to be the motivation for you to come back? Or, like you said, is something going to be more sinister about that Earth? I would almost venture to guess, and be certain, venture and almost put money on the idea that there's going to be some underlying thing that he discovers about this other universe. So it's like, oh, wow, okay, no, that's not good. That's not good at all. So right now it's all sunshine and roses and like it's all good for him. It's the life that he's always wanted, that he's never had. But what is that sinister underlying tone that more than likely exists there? We will see. We will certainly see. We've got 7 whole episodes. And I'm with you. Again, regardless of people not knowing what a retcon is or not, like the way that they handled it, like anybody that's upset about that, I don't really understand why. Like it's necessary, okay? Because obviously the DCU has a different Justice League than what we had in the DCEU, okay? And we're no longer watching the DCEU. The DCEU is over, and this was the last, like potential connection to it. So, like he has said multiple times, like James Gunn has said multiple times, season 1 is DCEU, season 2 is DCU. And I think it's pretty clear the idea that there's subtle differences in like how events happen, right? Project Butterfly still occurred in the DCU. It was just the Justice Gang that responded late, not the Justice League. What's wrong with that? Nothing. No issues with that whatsoever, because we are seeing the DCU timeline now in that regard. So, yeah, I'm fully on board with it. I have no issues with it. No different than what any of us, I think, rational individuals would expect, Jared. So, I hear you on that for sure. Thank you, as always, for the feedback, good sir. And yeah, I will definitely probably have to be adding Star Trek IDW comics and the Lego Batman game, the new one, onto my long list of media that I don't know that I'll ever get fully caught up on. And that's going to do it for this particular episode of Flight Chat. Thank you so much to everybody that sent in feedback this week. Thank you to John R. for our trip back into the 90s with your email. Thank you to Stu Little for your thoughts on King of the Hill Revival and Alien Earth. Thank you to Anthony Dorsey for all of your thoughts, and congratulations again on joining the working world once again, good sir. Thank you to Alex and your thoughts and your awakening, if you will, with respect to Scooper Madness. And thank you to Jared for your recommendations on the IDW Star Trek books and your other thoughts as well, and our shared anticipation along with Anthony for the Lego Batman game. Thank you to everyone for all of your feedback this week. Greatly appreciated as always. If you hear this and you want to join the feedback circle here on Flight Chat, you know where to find me on Threads or on Instagram at the Flightcast. I'm also on Blue Sky at Flightcast. I am not on Twitter though, right? So I guess I don't want to challenge either. According to Jeff Snyder, I'm not on Twitter. So it's Twitter/X, whatever. Those fools can stay in that toxic hellhole if they want to. But you can also comment on the posting for this page on the Flightcast YouTube page as well. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page. And of course, I can also be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right. Take care. Stay safe out there. Have a great week. And I will see you all next time. Take it easy.